Here's a subscriber who's had amazing paranormal experiences in her lifetime. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights. Here are 6 short stories of her haunted life. I am a 23-year-old female, and throughout my entire life, I've had many experiences that one might call odd. I'm not here to try to convince anyone about the paranormal, but just to share my stories. So, let's start at the beginning. My family moved into their current home in Illinois when I was about 4 years old. It was not your typical suburban home built in 1997, but rather an old brick 1940s bungalow a block away from an old cemetery. Before we lived there, it was used as a butcher's home until it was bought by another family and turned into a bed and breakfast. It was strange to think that people would pay to stay there, but I guess they did. And I wonder how many odd people had slept in my room before we lived there. When we moved in, we noticed some interesting features. The house had a creepy brick basement painted black and a widow's walk on the roof that emanated the sound of someone walking whenever it rained out. It also had a boarded up crawl space of sorts that connected the closet in my room to my sister's closet. Creepy, right? It also didn't help that my parents are antique collectors and decorated the whole home with old stuff and Victoria-era furniture. At one point, my dad even installed a rusty iron fence around our yard. I asked him where he'd gotten the fencing, and he nonchalantly told me it was from the cemetery. That didn't help the creepiness. From an early age, I felt uneasy in quite a few areas of the house, and I felt watched pretty much any time I was home alone. Whenever I started up the stairs where my sister and I's bedrooms were, I felt as if someone was chasing me. I almost never walked up those stairs, always ran. And I never went to sleep without feeling watched, as I always just felt a presence standing in my doorway looking in. Many strange things happened up there in my bedroom. My radio, I had one at a school function and never used once, turned on by itself when I left the room, blaring opera music. Several other times, I was awoken in the middle of the night to my Barbie washing machine going off. Another time, my door, which locked from the inside, got stuck and locked me in, only to open after a half hour of struggling when my dad finally decided to drill a hole through the knob. My sister also claimed to hear scratching from my closet when she would sleep in my room on days I was gone. The most unusual occurrence, though, took place one night when I was about 10 years old. I was jolted awake at around 1 a.m. I know this because I looked right at the clock, as I always did when I woke up. This is also how I know it wasn't a dream, since I could make out the numbers on my clock clearly. As I looked away from the clock, I noticed something strange. A little girl was standing in my room, looking in my toy crib at my stuffed animals I kept in there. She was about 6 years of age, with long hair to her lower back and a lacy white long-sleeve nightgown that looked Victorian. At first, I thought it was my sister, but then I realized it wasn't. Not only was this girl not my sister, she was transparent and glowing blue, and she was just standing as if she didn't even know I was there, looking at and touching my stuffed animals in the toy crib. After a few seconds of pondering what to do, I finally spoke up and said, "Do you like my toys?" She looked up at me nervously, as if she was startled to see someone, and quickly ran for the door. Before she got there, though, she disappeared. Just vanished as if she was never there. One might think I'd be scared, but the experience was nothing but peaceful, and I felt no threat. She just seemed like a lonely girl who wanted some toys to play with. I drifted back off to sleep a few minutes later, thinking nothing of it until morning, when I realized what had happened. I told my parents, but they didn't believe me, and to this day, they still joke about the dead girl in my room. Could she have been a previous visitor to the bed and breakfast? Or a helpless soul attached to a certain object my parents brought home? Perhaps a wandering spirit from the cemetery down the block. I can't say for sure, but I did ask my dad where the matching Victorian bed and dresser set came from. Apparently, they originally belonged to a sea captain's family, whose daughter founded a prominent college in our town. The daughter apparently lost her mind after the death of her favorite daughter, and according to her biography, she performed seances almost nightly to try to contact her little girl. Could this be the little girl that I saw attached to the family bed? I will never know, but the thought itself is eerie enough. As a child, I was scared of my alarm clock. I don't know why, but I guess I just really hated the high-pitched sound it made. Since it made me anxious, I stopped using it, and I just had my mom yell up the stairs to wake me instead. My mom is great at remembering to do things. She never forgets, and she would wake me up at the same time every day to the exact minute, 7:03 a.m. Well, one morning, I was deep asleep and dreaming, nowhere close to waking up. Then, all of a sudden, a voice inside my head shouts over my dream. "Wake up. Your mom forgot to wake you up." It jolts me awake, and I open my eyes. My clock reads 6:57. I didn't really question how weird it was originally, but rather enjoy the fact that I had still another 6 minutes of morning rest before my mom would pester me to wake up. Every minute, I open my eyes to check how much time I have left to relax. 6:58, still 5 minutes. 6:59, still 4 minutes. 7, still 3 minutes. 7:01, still 2 minutes. 7:02, darn, almost the end of my lazy bedtime. 7:03, any second now, my mom will be annoying me to wake up. 7:04. Weird. She hasn't woken me up yet. 7:10. Wow, she's really not coming. So I pull myself out of bed, confused and a bit annoyed, and I go to see why my mom hasn't woken me up. I make my way down the stairs, through the hall and to her bedroom, where I see her casually reading the newspaper in bed. "Why didn't you wake me up?" I demanded. "Oh," she says, "I must have forgot." Whatever, I think. At least I got to relax a few extra minutes. But then I start to wonder about that voice in my head. What was it? And how did it know ahead of time that my mom was not going to wake me up? It's creepy to think about. And to this day, I've never had anything else like it. When I was born, I was welcomed home by my mother and father, as well as our feisty older cat. Her name was Jasmine, or Jazzy as we called her, and she was a middle-aged gray tabby. As I grew up, she grew up with me. We had many adventures together, and despite the times when I made her mad and she would scratch me, I loved her dearly and considered her to be a great friend. When I was old enough to understand responsibility, my parents decided to get a dog, Zen little Jazzy, who was at this point a senior citizen, didn't like sharing her home with this hyper-drooling golden retriever. She would often retreat into her favorite spot when he was around, which was behind our living room couch. There was a heater behind the couch near the end, and it would fill the tiny space from the couch to the wall with warm air, perfect for her to get a cozy snooze. If she wasn't wandering the yard, she was almost always there. She remained a lovely member of our family for another year or so after we got our dog, until she quickly passed one day. I went to the basement to find her deceased on the floor. I believe she was around 19 at the time, and although she had lived a long and happy life, I was sad that the last year of it had been shared with a dog she didn't like. I was also very sad that I never got to say goodbye due to her sudden death, and I thought of her quite often, visiting her grave in the backyard when I could. One day, about 10 years later, I was home alone watching TV on the living room couch. Sadly, I hadn't thought about our sweet Jazzy for a long time. With the hecticness of high school and my many obligations, I was sitting there, kicking back to one of my favorite murder investigation dramas, when suddenly I heard something that it sounded like purring. I muted the TV, thinking perhaps it was on there, but the sound continued. I turned my head to hear where it was coming from, and found that it was emanating from behind the couch. And it was coming from the spot right by the heater, the space where Jazzy had liked to rest. A warm feeling suddenly overcame me, as the purring moved around the end of the couch and got louder, coming up close to my ear. It was as though Jazzy was coming around and saying hello, and giving me one last nuzzle, to finally tell me goodbye, years later. It lasted about a minute or so, before the sound disappeared completely, and I was left to wonder about it. It was a very peaceful and calming experience, and I'm very glad to have had it. I can't say for sure that it was Jazzy, but I really don't have any other explanations. After all, it was her favorite spot, and I was not thinking about cats in any way when it happened. I just hope my sweet, lovely lady is at peace. And after this experience, I really do believe she is. When I was about 17, I started working at a local farm. It was one of those places you would take your kids every fall. It was a big property with an orchard, produce for sale, homemade pies, home decor, a petting zoo playground, and even a large corn maze. It was a perfect place for family fun. But the vibe I got from it was a little more eerie. The couple who built the farm had a brutal divorce and ended up selling the estate to another family. That is when I started working there. My best friend and I worked in the old barn that sold the home decor and suites. It had a mezzanine office and attic upstairs with a balcony overlooking the shop floor. I don't know why, but it just didn't feel right in that building. My friend and I always felt watched from and often heard footsteps from upstairs. At one point, my manager even said she had heard something upstairs say my name. I don't know if it was true or if she was just pulling my leg, but still, creepy. One day I was working alone, which I hated. I was passing my time by putting bird ornaments on a display in preparation for the upcoming Christmas holiday. The display rack was very heavy, weighing about 50 pounds, and was dreadful to move. I know because I had dragged it to the location it was in. I carefully put on each ornament, for there weren't really hooks, just wooden rods, and it would have been easy for them to fall off if I wasn't careful. One by one, I put them on delicately, until the rack was pretty much full. I then went across the room to do something else and suddenly felt uneasy. I stopped in my tracks and out of nowhere I heard a loud crashing sound and turned around to see all of the bird ornaments swinging in a fury. Shockingly, the display had moved a whole foot from where I had placed it originally. I know this because of how anal I was about getting it perfectly centered between the two other displays. It was heavy, and there was no wind or air movement whatsoever, let alone one strong enough to move a 50-pound display. Amazingly, all the ornaments, despite swinging like mad, were still intact. I ran out of there as fast as I could and never worked alone in there again. I cannot explain how something so heavy could have moved on its own, let alone how these ornaments I so tediously struggled to keep on the rods had not flown off. There was something that just wasn't right about that place, and I was happy it ended up closing after that year. After my stint at the farm, I moved on to my next line of work, cashiering at a local thrift shop. I will start by saying that thrift shops are a bit odd to begin with. Not only do you sometimes get in items from the deceased, but you also get some creepy regulars. And who's to say that those regulars don't stick around after they pass on? The particular store where I worked definitely made me question this on a few occasions. Every morning, during opening, and every night during closing, you would hear strange sounds. Despite no customers being in the store at these times, there were the occasional sounds of carts being pushed, the rustle of plastic bags, and the sounds of hangers sliding on the racks. Once, a fully wound music box even started playing full speed out of nowhere, only to stop when we ran to it. And then there was an odd sound of a woman humming, only to disappear and come back in conjunction with a tobacco odor. And weirdly, banging on the roof every night after the last customer would leave. You could say things were a bit strange at the store, but I love thrift shops and didn't mind the odd happenings one bit. In fact, I often even came in on my days off to shop. One particular day, I was dressed up as Alice in Wonderland. Don't ask, I was in my punk Lolita phase. Anyways, I'm pushing my carts along, walking down the aisles in my patent leather Mary Janes, when I suddenly spot a regular. He's about 10 feet down the aisle, and I call out to him. He says hi, and we start chatting from a distance. I'm asking about his finds, when my eyes direct themselves to a teacup down the aisle, and between us on the top shelf. Weirdly, just as I look at it, it flies off the shelf and lands a couple feet in front of my shoes, in the center of the aisle, smashing to pieces. I back away nonchalantly and ask one of my friends working for a broom, while the regular I was talking to is standing there in fear. He is shocked and leaves shortly after in a hurry. Dear flying teacup, are you the result of a poltergeist, my own mind, or a humorous ghost wanting to show poor Alice a little bit of your Wonderland? Not long after the teacup incident, I had to quit my job at the thrift store. It was sad to go, but I had to move an hour away for college. Of course, though, the odd occurrences continue there as well. The major source of activity this time was my apartment, the place where I was supposed to relax and let go of tension after long days in class. But of course, that was too good to be true. I often felt watched, just as I had in my childhood home. Whether the feeling was something ghostly or a product of the restless isolation I felt in college, I will never know. But I had some strange occurrences there. Every once in a while, I would hear a strange tapping sound in the wall, Whenever I would walk over to see where the sound was coming from, it would stop suddenly. Then, there was a time a book randomly flew off my shelf by the TV. But besides this, the scary part really was just the vibe I got living there. It was like at my childhood home, as if I was always being watched. It was most terrifying when I tried to sleep. I would feel something's just standing near the foot of my bed watching me. When my fiancé would stay over, he also got an eerie vibe. He especially hated being there in the mornings alone when I left him behind for my shift at the diner down the street. He also just felt that something wasn't right, like something was watching. The climax of this feeling happened one night when we were up late talking, as young lovers often do. It was 3 a.m., and we were probably having some deep discussion about the universe, when suddenly we were both overtaken by something that felt very evil. It was hard to describe, but we stopped talking and it got perfectly still. There was a coldness to the air, a paralyzing sense of spite and malevolence, like something was right there and was going to overtake us. We both started silently praying and praying over and over again as the feeling continued to escalate, hoping that if there was a God, that he would help us, because we felt powerless in this presence of absolute dread and fear, a strange magnetic energy that was attaching itself to us. The feeling grew stronger and stronger until... what the fuck? The streetlight right outside my window suddenly went out, snuffed in an instant, just like the evil feeling. 5 seconds later, the rest of the streetlights at my apartment went out as well, in one synchronized swoop. Confused but relieved, we let out a breath we've been holding and tried to get back to sleep. We still don't know what exactly we experienced that night. Could it have been a demon? A negative energy cloud? Or what? And was it just a coincidence that the light outside my window went out first? Or did whatever it was make that happen? Strange things continue to this day, although not to the extreme they used to. Our new home in Oregon has been blessed, and I've had nothing terribly strange occur here. The energy on the West Coast feels lighter than it did in the Midwest. It's a fresh start, in a younger state, and I'm grateful for it. I'm sure there'll be more to this chapter, but I'll just have to wait and update you on that another time. Thanks so much for taking the time to hear my stories, and I hope that your life is truly less haunted.